Let's start this story in Austin, Texas, June 2010. Republican lawmakers have just proposed a very strict voter ID law, and they're making their case. The Elections Committee of the Texas House of Representatives calls a hearing.
All right, good morning. Fresh from the season of political party conventions where we are in the habit of saying really nice things about each other, we decided to have a hearing on voter ID and give us the opportunity to continue that trend.
These state representatives, who all seem a little tired, are about to get an update on the scope of elections fraud in Texas. The Texas Attorney General's office scoured the state for cases, and they've brought a detailed report to present. Every case they've seen in the previous 8 years. State Representative Rafael Anchia is going over those findings.
There was one case, and we might want to talk about this, of one kind of illegal voting, voter impersonation at a polling place that was in Harris County, and it's the case of Jack Carroll Crowder.
Jack Carroll Crowder, the Attorney General's report said, had cast a vote in his father's name in the 2008 Democratic presidential primary.
He pled to the fact that he was not eligible to vote, and he voted.
The committee spent almost 20 minutes talking about Crowder's case, but they never got to the big question I had, which was, why would somebody vote in his father's place? Maybe he was just super enthusiastic about a candidate and wanted to vote twice. Maybe someone paid him to do it. I figured I'd call and ask. I found a phone number for Jack Carroll Crowder. A woman named Kathy answered the phone.
This is his mother.
Oh, hi. I was hoping to reach him just to ask him if I could hear a little bit more about the voter impersonation that he was charged with.
It was a total misunderstanding. He went down there to vote, and on the ledger was my deceased husband's name, which shouldn't even have been on there. And he showed his ID, and the little elderly lady told him, sign right there.
And why did that little old lady tell him to sign right there?
Him and his dad has the same exact name.
Jack Carroll Crowder Jr. and Jack Carroll Crowder III. His father had died and shouldn't have been on the voting rolls in the first place. The whole thing was a mistake, his mom says, that the poll worker should have caught. But Jack paid a high price. He was charged with a felony and spent thousands on legal fees. Jack Carroll Crowder didn't want to talk for this story. He really wants to put all this behind him. But his mom refuses to do that.
Do you follow any of the voter ID?
I haven't voted since and won't.
Really?
I hate to be rude like that, but what they did to my family, no, ma'am, I will not vote.
This case was the only prosecuted case of voter impersonation the Texas Attorney General's office could find in 8 years of voting. That's more than 46 million votes cast in statewide elections. Let me say that again. 46 million votes cast, one person prosecuted for voter impersonation. Despite this striking lack of evidence, the Republican legislature pushed the law through. They even called an emergency session to do it. There was an underlying reason for all this urgency, says Vernon Burton, an historian at Clemson University who testified in court against the law.
Right before this, there's all this concern that Texas will be a majority state, that the Latino and black populations increase so that white would be in a minority.
In fact, in Texas, white people already were the minority, and the Republican base was shrinking. This new majority of black and Hispanic folks would tend to vote Democrat, and the voter ID law affected them more than anyone else.
Latinos and African Americans are the people who are most likely not to have the documents, to have to get off work, how hard it is to travel, less likely to have cars.
Burton says the voter ID law is just the latest in a long tradition of discriminatory laws in Texas.
In 1895, really, you get the all-white primary.
About 30 years after African Americans got the right to vote in the first place, just as they started to gain some political power in Texas, the white conservative Democratic Party that ruled the South back then passed a new law.
And here's what they said. I've actually got the exact quote. Ballots cast by Negroes are void. It went on and said that when you voted in a white primary, you had to affirm, that is, you had to say, quote, I am a white and I am a Democrat.
You had to go stand in front of the person who'd take your ballot and say out loud, I am a white and I am a Democrat. Now, lawmakers did come up with a pretext for the law.
Well, the stated rationale was, in fact, to prevent voter fraud.
Sound familiar? The new law would supposedly prevent illegal voting by Black and Mexican American people. The all-white primary was around for 50 years until it was finally eradicated in 1944. But Texas already had another law in place, a poll tax. One of the most common ways states across the South kept Black people from voting back then. To register to vote, you had to pay a fee.
You had to pay, and then they made it cumulative in some states so that if you missed 1 year, it'd be the next year you had to pay it all back.
Guess what this law was for?
Again, the stated rationale was to prevent voter fraud.
When the poll tax was struck down in 1966, the Texas governor called an emergency session of the legislature. He pushed a law through that required voters to re-register every year.
Again, it was stated to prevent voter fraud.